If you'd like to open your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 18. 1 Kings chapter 18. And I mentioned a few times ago when this happened that early on I was trying to make sure I was hitting things that we haven't hit recently and that kind of thing. I know we have talked about Elijah at some point in the last year or so, or at least it feels like that to me. And as I told you the last time this came up, I don't care. Because I like this story too much to skip it. So I thought we would delve into this one again. And I didn't look at whatever the last one was, so if it's similar or not similar, I have no idea. But we're just going to talk about this story again. And I was thinking on Friday night, sat on my couch, about 9:30 at night, my phone rings, and it's Jet McCoy on the other side of the line. I see it on the caller ID, and I think to myself, it's 9:30. This could take me to midnight. If I'm not careful. Do I really, am I sure about this right now? I haven't told Jed any of this, so you can't tell him. So I answer the phone, and I was so glad that I did because Jet was on the other end of the line saying, Ty Silver wants to be baptized. We need somebody to witness, although I don't really know that's a biblical requirement. Need somebody to be a witness, and more than that, somebody that has a key to the building. And so they said, would you mind? I'm like, yes, I'm happy to. And I got to be up here and witness that. And whenever I see somebody baptizing their kid, I'm always taken back in my mind to baptizing my kids and what that felt like and what that, it's just this culmination of prayer and desire for them to take the right steps in life and all of that. And I was watching Jet experiencing some of that, and it was just kind of a neat moment. And it made me think about this today of what our spiritual highs might be. And I don't know what they would be for you. You know, in youth group days, there's moments at camp, or there's moments at, Thorin just has a great class or a Devo or something, and it makes you think of something in a way you've not thought of it before. There might be a time where it's a worship thing. If you went up to Affirming the Faith a few weeks back, the singing there is just unbelievable. And I usually leave there with a sore throat because I can't hear myself sing. And I'm hoping it's in tune, but I'm not 100% sure because I can't hear it. And I've had moments like that in different places and different times. I think through Scripture, and we see so many of those kinds of things where people encounter God in big ways. I think of, Moses encountering God in the burning bush or in the parting of the sea. I think of moments where God would actually audibly speak and people would hear it, or where people were just witnesses of his power. And what Elijah experiences in this chapter is one of those big kind of moments. And I think to myself, if I experience something like that, what happens afterward? And when it's just regular worldly kind of stuff, it kind of gets us on this high where we feel like, look at what I've done and look at all the great things that have happened here. And then usually the way the world works is we're humbled pretty quickly after that by something. But biblically speaking, when are those moments where there are highs like that? And what happens after? Are we newly revived to really just take on the world and do the godly things in every circumstance? Or do we find ourselves pretty quickly back where we were before, or pretty quickly listening to the wrong voices and thinking of the wrong things? And I think in Elijah, we see some of that going on. So Elijah, here in 1 Kings, beginning in chapter 17, I said 18, we'll spend most of our time in 18. I just want to kind of set this up at the beginning of 17. Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, and we don't name our kids Ahab or Jezebel anymore because those are not good folks in the Bible, very ungodly people who are in charge here. He says, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. You may have felt at times in Oklahoma as if Elijah had spoken. There's going to be no dew, no rain. It's going to be a mess unless Elijah says otherwise. And we don't get an indication of exactly how long a time period that is here in 1 Kings, other than it seems like it's going to be a while. But in James chapter 5, James gives us kind of the commentary on Elijah here in 1 Kings. And it says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. He prayed fervently that it might not rain. And for 3 years and 6 months, it did not rain on the earth. So James gives us the insight to Elijah prays that it's not going to rain. And for 3 years and 6 months, it doesn't. And again, not because of Elijah necessarily, not because of the power that he might have, but because of the power of God and the fact that Elijah is in tune with God and going for the things that God desires. So Elijah, first of all, prayed for drought, and it happened. There was no rain. And so if I'm Elijah, there are a few different ways I could go with this at this moment, but let's assume I'm not going to get the big head about it's just how well I've prayed that has done this, but it's the power of God. I think I would take a little bit of excitement in the idea that I have asked of this thing and God is listening and God is doing. And I would feel pretty good about my connection with God at this moment, that God and I are on the same page and these things are happening the way they should. And then down to verse 17, Ahab sees Elijah. They've come into contact together, and Ahab said to him, "Is it you, troubler of Israel?" Now, Ahab blames Elijah for this. He blames, it's completely on Elijah. What Ahab doesn't get is Elijah wouldn't have prayed this in the first place if Ahab wasn't such a mess, and if they weren't leading Israel in a way that was away from God. And so he wants to blame it on Ahab, and yet Elijah is quick to tell him, "It's not me, it's you." And he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, in your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." And this is a pretty consistent theme that happens throughout the Old Testament, whether it's the Baals or Molech or whatever other god comes along, where the Israelites have this tendency to kind of latch on to the things that the people around them are doing. So Elijah goes and he confronts him about this. And then in verse 19, he says, "Now therefore, send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. So first of all, he challenges Ahab face to face, which is a pretty gutsy move. Now, there's some of this that is the courage of who Elijah is, but I think there's a lot of it that as Elijah recognizes he's not facing Ahab on his own. He's got God behind him or God in front of him leading, and he's going to face up to Ahab regardless of what the consequence might be. Verse 21 says that Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him." And the people did not answer him a word. Now, it's easy for us when we get into these stories of different gods that different nations had in the Old Testament days to feel like this is just a whole foreign concept to us that has nothing to do with us. But could this not be worded for us in a different way of, how long will you go limping between two different options? If the Lord is God, follow him. And put whatever you want in the blank here. If this is the thing, this is the one you're going to follow, then choose him instead. Consciously, we don't tend to do this. Subconsciously, and with our time and with our money and with our concerns and any number of other things, we tend to put a lot of things in the place of God if we're not careful. So Elijah says to them, "You have to choose." Then Elijah said to the people, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves and cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and put no fire to it. And you will call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, "It is well spoken." So Elijah decides, let's have this contest. And we will get these 2 sacrifices ready to go. And whichever God it is that answers by fire, this is the God that we're going to serve. So he challenged 450 prophets of Baal. I think we gloss over this part of the story sometimes, if this is a familiar one to you. Can you imagine what it would be like to be alone standing in the face of these other 450 people, also understanding that the king and the queen are kind of on their side with all this? This auditorium seats somewhere in that neighborhood, 450 folks. Do you know how uncomfortable it would be to be up here and to be speaking even, and to say something and immediately realize no one in the room agrees with you? You know, I've had uncomfortable moments up here from time to time. Usually it involves somebody snoozing or something like that. But if I were to say something and I could tell by the look on the face of the people here that literally every person in the room, we had a full house, like we probably will next week. Every person in the room does not agree with what I'm saying. Do you know how hard it would be to keep on that track and to double down on it and to keep going. And my life is not at stake. It could be a dud that day. I might have messed up, or maybe all of you were wrong. I don't know. But for whatever it was, it would be so easy to begin to back down at that point from whatever it is. But here's Elijah, and again, he's on his own, but he's not. He knows that God is with him. And so he makes this challenge to all these prophets of Baal that this is the thing that we're going to do. So they set up these altars, and they're going to have this great contest. And Elijah, if we were to read through the entire story, which we won't tonight, but Elijah kind of eggs them along on the way. And so they begin, they put their sacrifice out and they begin calling out to their God. And we look at it from our day and time and we think, well, of course there's no answer. How is this God that doesn't exist going to answer? I wonder oftentimes for them, what were they expecting? Have they experienced anything in life that would tell them it would end any way other than the way it did? Or have they just convinced themselves that maybe it will be different this time? And they call out to their God and they call out to their God and nothing happens. And Elijah says to them, could be sleeping. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe he's on a journey. Maybe he is off in whatever the version of the godly restroom is in that day. And they begin to yell louder. And then they begin to cut themselves to try to get the attention of their God, and nothing. And I would imagine this is probably the most odd, sad, comical, I don't know how you would look at it, scene unfolding as they get louder and louder, and still there is nothing. And then Elijah has a very different kind of result. In verse 36, it says, at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel. Now, Elijah, before we get to this verse, he's had the altar built. He's got these stones representing all the tribes of Israel so they can remember their history. He has doused over and over again this offering with water. I don't know much about making fire. I do know generally you don't use water first. And they have doused it. And then he begins this prayer speaking to God. And he says that I am your servant and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. And again, I don't know a lot about fire, but that's not how fire works. And yet this fire comes down from heaven and literally consumes all of it. Can you imagine? I don't know exactly what Elijah was expecting this to look like. I do know that if we know anything about the faith of Elijah that James talked about, the fact that he could pray and it would not rain, I think he knew God was going to do something here. But I wonder if he knew it would look exactly like this. This fire comes down, consumes everything. And when the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The people saw it, and they fell on their faces, and they said this. Who are the people? You've got Elijah, you've got the prophets of Baal. I don't know if there's any tag-alongs that have just come to watch all of this happen, but the people who are there, who moments ago Elijah felt like he was very much in the minority in a big way, now have seen what God does and acknowledge not just that Baal is not, but that God is. And they see what God has done. And Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. Elijah was victorious. And that's understatement, by the way. I cannot even begin to imagine what it would feel like to have been just alone with God before that. And then suddenly you have overcome all of these other people where you felt like you were the only prophet left, and they had these 450, and now you are victorious because of what God has done. Now, if this were you or me, what is the next thing you do? If this is you or me, I used to, when I was in Arkansas, I taught a Bible class at Harding Academy. It came right after chapel there at Harding Academy, and frequently during the fall, during football season, they would have these things on Fridays called pep rallies. I still don't understand. I had pep rallies when I was in high school. Richard, you probably don't understand either. I had pep rallies when I was in high school. I attended them some when I was teaching there at the academy. My kids went to them somewhere along the way. I don't know how it makes the football team better, but I guess it's supposed to somehow. People are supposed to leave there charged up for what's coming. And they do all kinds of things to try to get people excited and to get people enthused. And they go out and they're excited about whatever it is they're going to do. Could you imagine what this would do to you when it comes to how you view God and how you view the people that everyone else feels like are powerful? How that would change everything. Even if you were already faithful, even if you already knew what God could do, to have witnessed this, to have been a part of this, I cannot imagine just the pep in your step coming out of there of, I've got nothing else to worry about for the rest of life. God is on my side. He's always going to defeat them. And yet from Elijah, we see something very different. It says that Ahab told Jezebel that what Elijah had done, all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as one of them by this time tomorrow." To which, if I'm Elijah, I like to think I say, what gods are you talking about? Because I just saw those guys defeated on the mountain in a very large way. Let me tell you all about it. What power do you have over me? Because look at what my God can do. I think of all the ways I would like to think that I would respond if I were Elijah, because God has proven himself over and over and over again. But verse 3 says, then he was afraid. Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. Even in the midst of all of the things that God has done, Elijah was still afraid. Now, I am on the one hand incredibly frustrated with Elijah, because I just want to shake him and go, Elijah, you just lived chapter 18. Do you not remember what God just did? Do you not remember those 450 guys that thought they had you and they didn't? And yet he's afraid. And yet, how often are we afraid? I know we've not seen fire come down from heaven and consume stuff, at least I haven't. But yet I've seen God do some pretty amazing things. And God has done things that I didn't anticipate. God has done things where I had a hoped outcome of whatever it would be, and God did something that was far beyond, as Jet said in class this morning, all we ask or imagine. I've had moments where God did something that confused me, and later on down the road, I began to see what it was he was trying to do. And if I had just maybe opened my eyes, I might have noticed it in the first place. God proves himself over and over again, and yet I still get fearful. And it's not just me, and it's not just you. I imagine you have fearful moments too. It's all throughout Scripture, because we see so many times, do not fear. God would not need to give the message, do not fear, if his people were not fearful. So Elijah is, instead of just relishing the victory that has come, he's afraid. But he himself, verse 4, went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Not only was he afraid, he gave up. He went down, went far away, ran, and then he found this tree and sat down and said to God, "Let me die. I've had enough." And maybe we have been there somewhere along the way, where we have just thought, everything has gone so wrong. I don't know what else to do. I just give up. And when it's not giving up on life the way that Elijah was attempting to here, I think there are a lot of people that we can think of who have given up on the church somewhere along the way. Maybe you have at some point in life and you've come back around. We give up on people, and too often people give up on God. And even if they continue to live life, they separate themselves from God because they have felt like Elijah somewhere along the way, where it feels like it's just me and the world is a mess and no one understands. And even when God proves himself, we forget really, really quickly. So Elijah gives up. Verse 5, it says, he lay down and slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And then down in verse 9, it says, then he came to a cave. Angel basically told him, get up, get moving. Don't just sit there and die under the tree. And he begins to go to this other place. It says he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here, Elijah?" And God kind of re-enters the picture at this moment as if to say, this doesn't make any sense. Do you remember chapter 18? Do you remember all those things that just happened? Why are you here? Why are you afraid? Why have you given up? And he said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." Elijah, he felt sorry for himself. And in the midst of feeling sorry for himself, isn't really being entirely honest with himself either. Who wiped out all the prophets of Baal? Do you think it's just him? Just by himself? He tells the people around that we're going to take out this. It's not just him. He's not alone. And yes, the people have disobeyed, and yes, the people have made a mess of things, but God is still there, and God is still active. But in the midst of it, he just can't see anything other than the mess that he feels like his life is at this moment. And sometimes we're there too, where we can't see what God is doing. We can't see the support and encouragement he tries to put in our lives because we just feel too bad for ourselves and how bad things can be. And he basically tells Elijah, get up and do things. Get up and get moving. So he said, verse 11, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. So all of these great, loud, booming things come along, but the Lord is not in those. But then there is this low whisper. And the trouble with a low whisper is it's easy to miss if you're not listening. You ever hear that sound within your house and you think, what is that? But then the refrigerator kicks on and the compressor's too loud and you can't hear whatever the sound was. Or somebody says something and you can't hear it, or there's other things. It's so hard to get to where everything is just silent, where you can hear. So here is this gentle whisper that God comes along in. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And sometimes, I love when God does this in Scripture, sometimes it takes more than once. Because he's already asked this question, he's already got a response to it, but he wants Elijah to really think through, what is it that you're doing here? And he said, and it sounds very similar, doesn't it? He said, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." I'm sure none of us have ever been guilty of, it's everybody else's fault. Or at the very least, it's somebody else's fault. And I am powerless in this, and there's nothing I can do about it. In Elijah's case, I, the one who prayed that it wouldn't rain, and it didn't rain for 3.5 years. I, the one who called on God to send fire down from heaven, and it sent fire down, and it took out the sacrifice, and the altar, and the water around it, and everything that's there. I, who was one in the face of 450 opposition, and now I'm still standing and they're not. In the midst of all of that, he just doesn't see that God is still there with him. And the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria." It's interesting to me that God doesn't explain himself. There are times where he does. When you look at the book of Job, and Job just lays out this whole thing, and then God basically gives him a chapter of, who do you think you are? Were you there when the foundations of the earth were laid? Were you there when this happened and that happened and I did all? Who are you to question all of this? But here, God just keeps going. God says, all right, get up. Here's the task for you to do, the thing you need to go and do. He was renewed by the presence of God. I don't know if Elijah is still thinking all these things in his mind, but we don't find them again. There's not another Elijah, woe is me, I'm the only one. He gets up and he goes and he begins to do. So in verse 19 it says, he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat. And toward the end of that little section we find in verse 21, then he arose, Elisha here, and went with Elijah and assisted him. So God has given him probably the thing that he needs more than anything at this moment, other than God, because he's already got God with him. He needs someone with him. He did not continue alone. Instead of being on his own and woe is me and it's only me against all of these people, God says, all right, if you see it that way and you feel like you're all alone, I am literally going to put someone next to you. And you are no longer alone, Elijah. You have this one to go through life with you. And for us, maybe that's a good first step. If you feel like you're all alone, if you feel like no one understands, if you feel like God is distant from you, he's not, and he is present, but maybe you need someone in your life to help you along that walk. And God gives us the church for that purpose. Then in chapter 2 of 2 Kings, in verse 11, Elisha and Elijah have been going around doing all kinds of things, and Elijah is getting ready to leave the earth, God has told him. And it says in verse 11, as they went on and talked, behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. Can you imagine? The wording here, I just love of they're walking along talking, and suddenly they've got to make space because there are now chariots of fire separating the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. Elijah got a pretty good ride home. What he had in mind sitting under that broom tree was, I want to die, I'm done, this is as bad as it can be, woe is me. And if he had gotten what he asked for, he never would have experienced this day. I don't know what this was like. I don't know what it's like to have this opportunity to avoid death entirely and just jump on this amazing ride and go to be with God. And you would feel like, surely this is enough. I mean, here you have this guy who's, and this is only a couple chapters worth of what Elijah has done. There's more to it than that. He's done miracles. He's done amazing things. But here's this one who has prayed for it not to rain, and it doesn't. And by the way, when those 3 years and 6 months are up, Elijah is the one that prays for it to rain, and then it rains again, and God shows him all of this. You have the prophets of Baal that come along. He defeats all of them. And then he gets in this woe is me moment, and God picks him up and dusts him off and gives him Elisha to go with him. And he continues being this prophet of God. And then the chariot of fire comes to take him to heaven. And that's a pretty good ending, but it doesn't end there for Elijah. And unlike other Old Testament characters too, it doesn't even end in the Old Testament for Elijah. In Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 3, and we'll bring this together here. It says that after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, John his brother, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. As if a chariot of fire was not enough, he gets to meet Moses and Jesus. And I don't know what in the world they're talking about. I don't know if Jesus is saying to Elijah, remember the broom tree? Remember how you thought that was it and you were done? And if that were the case, we wouldn't be here right now doing this. You wouldn't have experienced the things you experienced after that. You wouldn't have remembered the power of God that led you to that point. Or maybe he and Moses were comparing stories about the parting of the Red Sea versus the fire from the sky and which one was better. I don't know. But Elijah, because he carried on with God, lived this just amazing life that continued on even far after he was gone. Now, for us, it's probably easy for us at times to just want to run away, as Elijah did. And we look at it in the pages of Scripture and it seems silly, because the stories of people that try to run away from God never turn out the way they think they're going to. God always has something else in mind. I don't believe that theme for God ends with those people. I think when we try to run away from God or move in a different direction from God, God has something different in mind for us too. And I don't anticipate a chariot of fire coming between you and I tonight and one of you guys jumping on and going home. But I think God has things in store for us that we couldn't imagine. I would imagine a lot of you, as you look back over your lives, probably could not imagine some of the things that God has already done within your life. How much we miss out on when we don't remember the power of God and what he does. Tonight, if you have never experienced that, it's not going to be a fire from the sky kind of thing, but I believe it is just as miraculous, just as supernatural what God is able to do in his people, that God is able to change us, to change our hearts, to make us better, to make us more like him. You can be baptized into him tonight, like Ty was Friday evening, and your life can be changed. Or if you have run away for any number of reasons, maybe God has brought you back here tonight because of that, and he wants to bring you back to him. If there's some way we can help you tonight, whether it's to come back to him and follow him for the first time, please come while we stand.